Okay.
Yeah, let me just introduce first for just for the recording. So today we are glad to have Dr. Mahesh Morjaria, who leads the team at the Terra-based development advanced control solution for solar and hybrid power plants. So he has spent a decade at First Solar and also utility scale solar R&D and grid integration initiative, which for sure he's one of the recognized industry leader in solar and power system innovation. Before that, he was at GE. He held key leadership roles, including significant contribution to wind energy. Dr. Mahesh holds a master and PhD degree from Cornell University. So as you see, that Dr. Mahesh has extensive prior work in different aspects of the solar integration. So we are really happy that he accepted to give us a talk. So for sure today we will learn a lot from him. So with that, let's back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. And what I want to talk about is inverter-based resources and some of the challenges and opportunities with that. The main theme of my talk is that solar, wind, and storage plants are now well established to provide standard grid-friendly capability. Now I'll show you some of that: active power control, voltage regulation, frequency droop, ride-through behavior. All these things were required by NERC. NERC is the North American Reliability Corporation, Electricity Reliability Corporation, had said, hey, if you are a variable generation plant, these are the functionality that you need to have in order to ensure that grid is stable and so forth. Now, with that in mind, now the key technical challenge is how do we continue to maintain grid stability and reliability while integrating increasing amount of this non-synchronous inverter-based variable generation. It's a variable generation. If you look at the picture on the left, you can see, in the middle of the day, solar produces so much that it actually displaces much of the conventional generation as such. Now, why is this an issue? Well, the first thing is inverter-based resources behave differently than synchronous generator. But the important and the opportunity is that they can be programmed. They are human programmed to address current and future reliability challenges. It's a program of how you use power electronics is something that we as humans can control that. Now, how we want to control it and all that is the challenge that we have to address. But nonetheless, the opportunity is that this is something in our control if we do it right. Now, what are some of the operational challenges with variable generation? So here's an example where if you look at this particular plant, this is Agua Caliente. This was one of the first utility scale plant that we built at First Solar in 2011-12 timeframe. It was a 290 megawatt PV plant on a 500 kilovolt transmission line. So it was a high voltage transmission line, and largest PV plant in the world at that time. So we were very proud of that. And we built in a lot of control features and so forth. But one of the things that it really, the utilities are very concerned about is that the output of the plant, if you look at this where the power is given in the green color, you can see it changes from day to day. It even changes even in a particular day when your clouds going through, you have quite a, like you can see on some of the, you guys can see my mouse, right?
Yeah.
So you can see there is quite a lot of variation that goes on. And so there was quite a bit of concern in the industry about intermittency. Intermittency means, first and foremost, is when the cloud's coming in, the power drops like a rock. So the question is, well, that's going to have a big impact on the power systems. But in practice, it actually does not. So a short-term intermittency due to clouds used to be a concern, but here is a, hopefully this will come through. You guys see it? Oops. Were you able to see the, this is what I was afraid of.
No, it doesn't play. Yeah, you want to play that video?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
It's a with this show it is hard, but I'll show it to you later. This, but if you see this particular video, you can see the clouds moving through. This is all real data moving through the plant, and the output.
Yeah. Sorry for interrupting. Maybe if you skip out of the presentation mode, maybe that.
Yeah.
That works. So maybe.
Let me stop that for a second, and then we will come back to it. 1 second. So
if you just escape key, so it comes out of the presentation. Oh.
Okay, no problem. Let me share my screen and then you'll see it.
Okay, yeah, that's much.
Well, I'll use this this approach anyway, so you'll see it.
Yeah, maybe right now, does it run? Maybe right.
Yeah, 1 second.
Oh, yeah, it's working. Yeah, that's good.
So what you're seeing here is clouds, the clouds going through the plant, and this is real data, by the way. This is not a reflection on the cloud, by the way. It's actually a output of the inverters on each of those panels that you see, and we have color coded it so that you can actually see things like that. But the point is that over this 20-minute period that we're talking about here, the output of the plant is relatively constant. I mean, it's not exactly constant, but it's not the case that you have clouds that cover the whole plant and suddenly the power drops to zero. And just to prove the point, so as the large plants, they attenuate the impact of cloud passages, and this is now less of an issue. But when we started it, in that time frame, people were very concerned about. So we actually did publish a paper with our buddies from Columbia University, where we showed that the ramp rate of a 1 minute ramp rate of the plant, if you look at this, this is a distribution of the ramp rate. As the plants become larger, as the plants become larger, then the distribution of ramp rate becomes much tighter as well. Yeah. So as plant becomes larger, short-term intermittency is attenuated. So this is not been an issue. And in fact, if I continue on, here is an output from just almost a year back from Texas. Now look at the generation plotted here in terms of the wind and the solar and then natural gas, etc. And you can see that this is where it is being handled very well. And in fact, this operational challenge to meet such a large, in this case, the reason I brought this up is that here you have 75% renewable generation serving the load at one time in that hour, for example. So huge amount of, very significant amount of inverter-based resources serving the load. And in this case, March, in Texas, it is a lower load as such. It's not as high as in summer case. And this is met by having flexible dispatchable power generators that can ramp up and down every day within just a few hours. As you can see, as the solar goes away, natural gas is ramping up and so forth. So that's the main message. Now, what allowed ERCOT to achieve this particular situation? One is their strong grid code. They're able to use renewable forecast in near real time. They're adapting ancillary services. These are services that you need besides energy to be able to balance the grid at all times. And I'll show you examples of that later as well. And they have enhanced risk assessment procedures that they have implemented. The bottom line on all this is that, as you can see, they are able to handle much larger variation of renewable generation. That's the main thing. Now, one of the things is to increase system flexibility. And how do we increase system flexibility? One is by just, and what you're seeing here is increasing flexibility and increasing costs. So this is kind of a plot that where by just improving the markets and operations, faster dispatch or expanded markets like California has done, where they have the short-term markets with their neighbors and so forth, that itself increases flexibility. Secondly, demand response, and ERCOT, for example, has quite a bit of demand response where when there is a shortage or when there is excess, you can ensure that the loads themselves can modify the behavior. And grid expansion. Of course, in the case of Texas, there's no grid to be expanded. But in the case of other balancing area where the grids are already big, and if they increase the balancing area, they can actually improve the flexibility as well. And finally, or not finally, flexible generation, which is something that is also important, and energy storage. Now, the important thing here is that, and I'll show you, that even solar can become flexible in many ways, and we have shown examples of that. And energy storage, especially as the cost of that has been coming down, is improving the amount of greatly facilitating flexible generation as well. Now, so there are many different ways, and this is just kind of explaining that again, that you have by increasing renewable energy penetration, there are many tools that one can use in order to improve the flexibility, in this case, transmission, larger markets, etc., the things that I already mentioned. Okay, so there are many best practices to manage variability, and they are evolving very rapidly. Now, grid-friendly solar inverter-based resources are now well established. And in 2012, there was a report by NERC which says, hey, if you want to be grid-friendly, you need to be able to provide voltage regulation, active power control, so that you can control your ramping when you're going up. For example, in the early morning hours, if the solar comes in very fast, that may not be accommodated in the grid. We should be able to curtail you. In other words, if the grid has an issue, they can curtail that. It should be able to ride through behavior. Hell, if there's a grid disturbance, you don't want the plants to trip off and in fact, they should ride through, so that when that fault, which may be few hundred millisecond fault, if that once it's past that, then you want the plant to be continued to generate that. And this has been something that they have learned along the way. It's very interesting. I used to be with GE in wind energy, and in 2000s, Germany decided early on that, hey, whenever there is a grid problem, all the turbines should basically trip off. Then suddenly they realized that was not a good idea. And so they started having this ride-through behavior requirement. And that has percolated into solar and other resources as well. Primary frequency group response. This is a mandatory thing that now NERC has put in, not NERC, but FERC rather, they are the regulatory agency, that all generators should respond to that. So that if there is a frequency that goes under the certain deadband, let's say, and if you have more power, you should be able to generate more power. If the frequency goes higher than certain deadband, that means you need less generation, so you want to drop the frequency, drop the power output, and through a group function like kind of shown on the right-hand side. And finally, short circuit duty control. This is very important for protection devices and so forth. So that's another aspect of it. Anyway, so that's the base capability of solar and wind and even storage plants that are now pretty much given that. Now, but that's not sufficient. One of the questions that we asked in quite a while back was, can solar provide essential reliability services? These are services that are currently being provided by conventional generation. And if we wanted to have replacing them, then we need to have means by which we can provide them as well. So we actually showed that solar can provide that. And the way we did that, we had a 300 megawatt PV plant where we collaborated with the California ISO for solar and NREL, and basically took that plant to show that, hey, if this plant was available megawatt on that plant, like this is a 20-minute real data, by the way, of the plant, then we can, through controls, actually provide 30 megawatt of headroom. And within this headroom, the CAISO can send AGC signals. AGC is automated generation control signals every 4 seconds. Every 4 seconds, they would say, hey, I want you, the plant, to follow this particular signal. And the output of the plant is as shown below. What do you guys think? How does that look?
Yeah, that's amazing. So yeah. The question is that, how do you do that one? Do you have energy storage over there or not? You are underutilized the, yeah, how do you increase? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So it's because what we are doing is we know what is available megawatt that is available, and we're keeping this as a 30 megawatt headroom available. Now you might say, hey, now you're losing the energy that you would have produced. Yes, that is true. But the question then becomes, which is more valuable to you? Yeah.
But there might be, yeah, I have one question maybe on that. If you have, let's say, forecast error, so you lose the headroom, right? Like in that, like you might not have available capacity due to the forecast error. Maybe.
That's a very good question. So it's not, we don't base it on the forecast, but we base it on the, we have actually a project with the DOE right now that we are working with NREL and some other company to figure out what is the potential available power. And that's what this is. So in this case, what we did was we took certain inverters as being reference inverters. So we know we're not curtailing those inverters. So we know that what is the full potential of each of them. That's what we use. Now, so it's not a forecast because you need this in real time. Forecasts are typically gives you the trend over some period, but it doesn't necessarily help you in a shorter term. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the inverter which are not curtailed are used as a reference.
Yes, exactly.
Determined. Okay, I see.
Now, people can say, hey, let's use, say, irradiance sensor as being the fuel that's available. But again, irradiance sensors also have a small spot in which it's measuring that. So if it is like covered with clouds and all that, you don't really are measuring what the whole plant is seeing. Remember, the PV plant is like a big transducer. It is converting sunlight into power, right? So, and if you just measure a portion of it, doesn't mean that it's reflective or it's a representative of the whole plant as such. So quite a bit to be done there, but nonetheless, that's the idea. Now, this regulation accuracy was 27 percentage points more accurate than the best conventional generation we can find. This was from CAISO, not from us. So it's like, if you were to do this AGC from a, say, fastest gas turbine, the accuracy is about 60% in that range. With this solar plants, it is in the 90% range. Now, it's not the solar plant per se, it is the inverters. Inverters, because power electronics can work very fast. That's what this is saying. Yeah. So this will be true also for storage, and wind also can do the similar thing as well. Yeah. So this was published in a report, and what it showed is that we can provide many of the grid reliability services like AGC, automated generation control, up regulation, down regulation, frequency regulation, and flexibility, depending upon. Now, of course, your question about storage is important, because here we are by putting a headroom, we are actually foregoing certain amount of energy, and the point is that may be still beneficial, especially in some circumstances. In fact, we have a plant in Chile. This is a 120 megawatt PV plant called Luis del Norte. And in Chile, Chile has a very, very good solar resource, and they could sell energy at $12 per megawatt hour. But regulation like this, they were selling at $32. This market prices change regularly. So they can switch from one to the other and make more revenue. That's the main point of that. So does that make sense? Back to your question about losing energy. Yeah.
It seems that there is one also question on the chat. So could you unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question? JW, what's that, JW?
Sure. Yeah. Hello. Yeah, I'm a researcher at PNNL. So really enjoying the presentation. But yeah, I think that last slide went exactly to one of the questions I was planning to ask. And I think you kind of just addressed it, which was, I was curious in that CAISO example, was the increase in the PV plant generation due to the CAISO AGC signal, was that compensated, or at a higher rate? Sort of, did they have a base rate that they were paid for the kind of the normal expected output, and then when they produced that little bit of extra margin where they paid, was a kind of the plant owner paid more?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And so this was done more of a demonstration. This was not a market present. But if you allow me, one of the, and so we went to CAISO and said, hey, CAISO, why don't you, use this approach? And the challenge they face is that the contracting way, which by especially in CAISO, is most of the plants are on a power purchase agreement with the utilities. So how do you compensate them for this kind of result? That gets very complicated, and it got tricky to make that available. But so that's why I gave you an example of Chile, where they actually put it in the market, and this is where you can do that. Excuse me. So the point that I want to emphasize is that I'm kind of showing that this is capable of doing that. Whether the market structures, etc., are enabled such a way that it takes advantage of that, that's a different matter. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Okay, I have some other questions, but I want to let you get back to the presentation.
No problem. Yeah, I am now. What I'm doing is I switched to the other way. This we did a different study as well, in which and I didn't have the chart here. I thought I did, where we showed that this was a Department of Energy fellow who did Stephen Dalke, who did a study to show that if California adopted this approach, then they can, or in fact it will be coming up again, then it can save quite a lot of money. But it's a this is all part of the difficulty of there's a difference between having technical capability versus having the market structures such that it can take care of that. So let me continue on, and you will see what I mean by that. So one of the things that we also did was we did a study with E3. This is an consulting company, and Tampa Electric. Tampa Electric was interested in saying, "Hey, we're going to put more solar in our portfolio, and by the way, we wanted to put like 600 megawatt of solar, and their load is approximately about 3.5 gigawatt or so 3,500." So we said, hey, if we put that lower, what would it have an impact on our regulation and so forth? So in order to study that, E3 basically took their portfolio and put in not 600 megawatt, but 2,400 megawatt of solar. So huge amount of solar. And so when the solar does not provide any regulation reserves, then you can see that they have to curtail quite a bit of solar ahead of time because they don't have the thermal generation that they need to support the load, especially like the duck curve that you hear about, would become very significant. However, if they use the solar in a flexible manner, where the solar is providing regulation reserves, then this curtailment goes down dramatically. And so what you're seeing here in this case is a reduced thermal generation commitment. I mean, the point is that thermal generation, once you commit it, it's like it runs on a minimum amount, and it takes a while to commit it as well. So you cannot ramp it up and down as easily as. But on the other hand, if you have solar and you say, I don't need as much solar, you can curtail it very easily. That's the whole point about this particular exercise. So this was done. And then Steve Dalke, who was a DOE fellow, kind of showed that if this flexibility can reduce annual solar system costs by 172 million. Now, the way to think about it is right now, when solar is generating a lot, it is getting curtailed. So if that curtailment can also be used as reserves for doing other things as well. So that's the message here. But as I said, this is all about, first the technical capability, and then secondly, how do we accommodate that in the market and so forth. So flexibility is a key resource attribute of the future grid. And PV can operate from zero to available power very quickly, and because there's no P minimum, I mean you can get it from zero to whatever power you want very easily, and it can follow AGC signal. This is a 4-second signal with much more accuracy, as I was showing you before, compared to combined cycle, steam turbine, etc. And PV can start up in seconds when solar resource is available. So it's that flexibility that can be applied. Now, can solar provide firm dispatchable capacity? This was one of the things that you say, hey, this is all well and good, but I need resources in the evening time frame. So here is a diagram which kind of shows that if we take solar, let's say, and you are in places like Arizona, you need the capacity at the evening time frame. So then if you just relied on solar, you can get at most 25% capacity in the evening time frame. However, if we add 1 hour of storage, let's say, then we can get 48%, 2 hours, 72% by shifting that energy, and 4 hours to 98% capacity. Now, it's not 100% because solar, there might be a day in Arizona when it rains and it doesn't produce any electricity that you can shift from solar. So that's why it's not 100%, but it is very significant. And that kind of sort of lays the groundwork of what we can do with solar and storage. So it's a clean energy plant that's more effective, more cost effective than conventional generation. And this is not just theory. We did this quite a while back, but here you are looking at solar. It's twice the natural capacity factor of the sun. Capacity factor being how much you can rely upon that to generate. And in this case, you can this is a solar plant with storage. And the important thing here is it is a much larger DC capacity that's been installed. And if you look at the solar price, it's about $19 or $20 per megawatt hour without anything. And but the price adder for storage is just $13 per megawatt hour. So it's quite effective. So basically, you're getting in the order of like $33 per megawatt hour for firm dispatchable power. That's the main thing. Now you can once you have the storage, you can do it. So this is a dispatchable clean energy path with a 60% capacity factor. So very interesting. And you can see that there's a lot more solar and storage being deployed now in the field. Now here's an example. This is all from real example where if you have this kind of hybrid plant, you can do a variety of different things with it. And actually the traders do that. They may bid in for upregulation for a certain period. They might bid in for downregulation and energy output, etc. And the control system has to handle both PV generation and handling of storage in a way that sort of meets those needs. And so this is something that we have been successful in, because part of our company's business is to provide control systems for the plant, including a hybrid plant, so that we can do this as well. So you can see it's pretty involved, but as far as the grid is concerned, they are getting the services that they are looking for. And the trader can obviously make use of this kind of services as well. So the bottom line is that storage enhances grid capability of PV plant. So without storage, we can still do things like AGC, upregulation, downregulation. But with the storage, we can have capacity firming, because this is something that's useful for resource adequacy, etc., energy shifting, and flexibility, etc. So that's the idea in general. Now, this is all well and good. I mean, you probably get an idea that, hey, everything is hunky-dory and we're making so much progress. It's not quite so. We had, over the years, quite a lot of NERC reports where you had reliability issues with IBRs, unexpected tripping, cessation of active power, oscillation, etc. And a lot of it is because first of all, there's a misapplication of IEEE 1547 standard, which was what was established for residential, and they applied for utility scale plants and not appropriate to do so, and so forth. And there was analysis found opportunity for standardization of IBR performance, because remember what I said, IBRs are a human program. So we haven't really told them exactly how to program that and so forth. So a lot of improvements have to be taken care of that. Let me share with you an example of that, what kind of issues we face. So here's a blue cut fire where solar's blue cut fire was a fire happened somewhere, and then there was a voltage disturbance, and that caused essentially 1.2 gigawatts of solar plants to drop, and not just one, but on a whole grid system. And when it took about 7 minutes to recover. Remember what I said? Hey, you need to have a grid fault right through. That doesn't look like a grid fault right through. So when we investigated that in detail, and this is a report that you can look up on that. So, and this is like 28 utility scale plants all tripping off like that. Not a good sign at all. And so when you look at it in detail, you find that the phase, the voltage lines, etc., there was quite a lot of disturbance on the phase lines at such phase and so forth for a very short time. And the programmers treated this as being a frequency drop. In other words, because this is all PLL driven, etc., they can calculate frequency in no time, except that they didn't realize in power systems, we are talking about frequency at the grid, not what this thing sees. And so this was, once you recognize that they should not be calculating this frequency like that, they should be waiting, they should be filtering, etc. We basically fixed this issue in relatively no time. So this one, we had a particular plant. Let me not given the time. So that plant, just some months later, similar event occurred. So this is a grid event that occurred. Two events occurred that, and you can see that the plants are recovering successfully after the plant. And we know that remediation worked because what we had was so this plant was fixed with this remediation, and it recovered within seconds as expected. And the proof that the remediation worked is that it just turned out in one of our plants that we had two inverters. One was fixed, one was not fixed, right next to each other. And what you're seeing is the power from inverter A without remediation tripped off, and it took several minutes for it to recover. Whereas the power from inverter B, which had that remediation, basically recovered very easy. So this was a very well-defined proof for that. And we shared that with the NERC team, and the NERC CEO, Jim Robb, he says, nobody ever told the inverter owners how to program them. The good news is industry has been very responsive. I think we have solved the problems that we know of, and which is true that we know of, but there are many more. So this is the main message of that. Now, so taking that, we have since developed the 2800 standards. How many of you know about the 2800 standard? Many? One, two? Okay, many of it. Okay, good. So why did we need these standards? It's because we had to tell the people who are programming inverters what exactly to do, because this is not how the inverters have to be programmed. They are not physical things like the conventional generation. They are driven by the controls itself. So that is the main message that I wanted to share with you. So part of that, and I'll skip over because of time, is that we put in fast frequency response, because after all, we need to have inertia, and the inverters generally don't have inertia. So we put in that requirement in the 2800 and so forth. Now, inverter-based resources interact with grid differently. Synchronous generators are, grid was designed around this behavior. They provide inertia and system strength, and dynamics and capabilities are based on the physics of the generator. Whereas inverter-based resources, they are power electronics-based, highly controllable. That's the advantage. But we have to tell them how to control them. They can provide very fast responses and superior grid fault right-through behavior. Now, of course, I gave you some examples of where they did not do that good job, but it can be fixed once we understand what the issue was. And but today's inverter-based resources lack inertia or system strength, and that can be addressed by grid forming technology. So with that in mind, I use this picture to show that IBRs provide frequency response, but through control software. It's not mechanically tied up with the grid as such. And I think this kind of illustrates that very clearly. Now, what are the challenges associated with high IBR penetration? So here is an example where, what do we mean by penetration? I mean instantaneous penetration. So here is an example from Texas where the penetration changes with seasons. In this case, this is a summer peak event. So in fact, this last summer, the Texas grid did very, very well compared to the previous summer because solar and wind contributed to that, even though the demand went up. And they managed that. Now, in summertime, it may not be high penetration, but in the time of like this example of springtime, the penetration was 75% generation was purely from inverter-based resources. So the concern is, and this is a presentation from Ben Kroposki, who kind of showed that as the system size increases and wind and solar penetration, you get into certain issues with that. So ERCOT in this, which was a 2019-18 data, ERCOT was 55% instantaneous power in ERCOT. ERCOT is a somewhat isolated grid. Of course, not as isolated as some of the islands, but in those islands, they have started using grid forming inverters to support that. So this became 75% in 2024. So this is instantaneous power that is generated, that is supported by inverter-based resources. Average power may be lower, as kind of shown here, in the sense of this diagram. Now, WEC, Western region, that instantaneous power is still quite small. It's not as big as so California has a lot of renewable resources, but it is part of a larger grid as such. So it's not as impacted as much as Texas, for example. So, and this is kind of illustrating, hey, what is it in the future? So this is from the DOE charts, where it says that as the number of hours where the instantaneous penetration is expected to increase, so that's on the x-axis, and y-axis is the penetration. And you can see from here that Texas is going to be the one that will have many more hours where the penetration is high compared to other eastern and western grid much sooner than other places. So this is an area that's of most interest. Now, fortunately, Texas has shown that by doing quite a bit of things like strong grid code, etc., they have been able to have very high reliability as such, balancing reliability. This is measurement. What you're seeing here is on the x-axis is the years go by, and on the y-axis is called CPS1. And whenever the CPS1 is about 100%, they are 170%. It's one of the best in North America. It's a measure of how well steady state frequency is maintained within the defined limits. And in spite of having increasing renewable generation going all the way average, this is to about 33%, 35%, it is still doing quite well in terms of managing that because of the kinds of activities that they have undertaken. So where are we going in the future? So we talked about inverters behaving differently. Now, in particular, grid forming versus grid following is kind of illustrated here. And grid following inverters are where it assumes that the grid is already available. It is formed, it needs a grid to synchronize to. So the power electronics basically mimic the sine wave that is coming from the grid. And that's most of the inverters today is grid forming. Grid following. Grid forming, on the other hand, is where it can make their own voltage, sine wave, and acts as a voltage source. And the important thing about that is that it can actually provide some of the functionality that is required in order to facilitate on the grid. So and the way to think about this is kind of illustrated here, where as we add more inverter-based resources, we basically go from a strong grid to weak grid. And there is if you look at on the y-axis, there's a stability limit. Let's say this is qualitative chart. So with the available standard grid following inverters and with these grid-friendly features that I mentioned, we can go to a fair amount of penetration without much difficulty. However, as we keep increasing the penetration, we have to take other measures. So in this case, we are best available grid GFL, grid following inverters with weak grid features. I mean, some of the ones that you had mentioned before are things that we need to add into the inverter technology to make that stable even for further. Now, in Texas, they have even taken other mitigations, including synchronous condensers, and even more importantly, adding a lot more storage resources that has enabled them to actually go for a much higher penetration without difficulty. But then as we continue on this path, we will have to use grid forming technology so that we can remain stable even at very high penetration. And that's the main message here. So grid forming technology can enable, of course, islanded operation. This is already exercised in many islands where they use grid forming technology. It's very well known. It's all about the software. Is nothing to do with the hardware itself, but software, and can provide enhanced fault contribution, which will help on the protection that you had mentioned before as well. Anyway, with that in mind, there is a activity. I'm sorry. First of all, if you look at this one more chart from Nick Miller, who is one of my ex-colleague for solar. I'm sorry, from GE. He is a real expert in this field. So if you look at what are the grid needs versus what grid following inverters can provide, there are quite a few things that it can provide: closed loop voltage control, fast frequency response, primary frequency response, all the things that I mentioned before. But then there are certain things that it does not provide, like control internal voltage phasor, voltage persistence and inertia, and even black start and islanded operations. These are things that are available for synchronous machines, but not available for grid following inverters. Grid forming inverters, on the other hand, can provide that. And that is the undertaking of this unified, what should I say, unified consortium that I think many of you are also members of, in order to say, hey, what are the requirements for grid forming inverters such that they can actually help in addressing the future needs of the grid as such. So with that, I want to conclude my talk by saying, hey, solar and wind plants are now well established to provide standard grid-friendly capability, no question about that. But we have to keep figuring out how to maintain grid stability and reliability with increasing amount of this penetration. And finally, the inverter-based resources, they do behave differently than synchronous generators. But the good news is that we can program them to address the future reliability challenges. So the way I see it is that we are doing a journey. In some ways, I kind of think of a journey from an analog grid to a digital grid. It is not unlike what we did from analog broadcast to digital broadcast in some ways. But that's just an analogy. The journey is very long, a lot more to be done in that case. So where inverter-grade IBRs can provide some of the reliability services like AGC, upregulation, downregulation, etc., grid following IBRs. And with storage, we can add all this other functionality that I mentioned, where you have capacity firming, energy shifting, etc. But at the end of the day, to go to the digital grid, we'll have to start using the grid forming inverters so that we can get to a future grid that is affordable because solar and wind resources are a lot more cost effective, secure, because that way we can actually meet all the grid needs that we have in mind, secure and reliable, clean and resilient, realized with an arbitrary mix of machines and IBRs and any scale. So that's what I had in mind. I know I went through some of it rather quickly, but hopefully you got the main message here. Thank you.
Thank you for the excellent talk. So we really appreciate that. Okay, let's go to the question first. Anybody on online want to ask question? Yeah, please.
Yes,
Nathan.
Nathan.
Sure.
Yes, so a great presentation. Thank you for explaining those concepts. My question is around the how can we upgrade the grid following inverters that are currently on the grid? Is it just a firmware upgrade, or do we need to completely replace those inverters?
So before we even, yeah, I mean, that can be done in that way. But the way I would put it is that, and which is one thing that I tell developers, that if you are putting in storage plants now, put them at grid forming storage plants, because that will enable, and it's not any different in terms of cost wise. And so that will enable you to have a certain other capability that may not be revenue generated today, but could be as the grids evolve. So that's the way I would put it. We have a much long, what should I say, transition period that we have to go through. So I'm not as concerned about using the existing GFL plants to convert them into GFM, but trying to get us to start using that for all the future plants, because it's a combination of those two will provide us with what we need. Now, how much, what combination is enough or not, that's part of the Unify Consortium's, what should I say, the activity to determine that. Does that help, Nathan?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. Dan, yeah, please.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. So kind of following along from I guess your previous answer, I'm curious if so we're a couple of years on from the start of Unify. I think a lot of the research has pointed to PLLs and grid following operation and like those plots you said, maybe a bit of a barrier to achieving really high penetration of inverter-based resource. So I was curious, do you know of any industry examples where a large utility scale plant sort of operates in some, there are different grid forming control strategies, but, uses one of them, whether, it's just group control or whatever it is. Do any come to mind, any that you're aware of?
I think Julia from ESIC has got quite a few examples. Excuse me, but a lot of them are from abroad. Okay. So first of all, islanded ones, there are many, right? I mean, Kauai is already implementing that. But if you look at even the Tesla system that was put in Australia quite a while back with a lot of fanfare, that is reforming as well. That's what I understand. And Great Britain has put in their code requirements for that. So, but in US, I don't know. I mean, we are looking for sites where we can do the demonstration, big sites, 20 megawatt or so. And so we're trying to help address that by maybe finding a site which has got storage being planned, storage being considered, and put them as grid forming. So especially in Texas, because as I said, Texas is the one that's going to be a lot more challenged a lot sooner challenged than other grids. Yeah.
And yeah, thank you. And I was just curious, do you think that the reason for maybe the US lagging a little bit in deploying grid forming controlled utility scale plants is kind of more on the market side as opposed to, because I mean, at this point, grid forming control is, I don't know if I'd call it mature, but it's well established. So is that kind of, would that be your opinion that we just, like you say, it's hard to, how would you compensate a plant that behaves like that with a purchase power agreement kind of?
Yeah, so the first thing is, if the grid operator says, I want this new plant that you're putting in, I want that grid forming, it would make a big difference.
Right.
But since that driver isn't there, and that makes the plant owner say, why do I bother with this any complexity? And then the OEMs are saying, if the requirements are clear, then we would be happy to do that. But that's also not there yet. So we are in this catch-22 kind of a mode. But personally, my message to owners is, and this may sound like a crude analogy, but think about it. If you have a car and that one car is Uber enabled and the other one is not, and you in future you decide to do Uber services, which car would you prefer?
Right.
One that's the way to think about. So there are many a lot of functionalities, including a very simple example: night wars, night reactive power. Solar plants can do that. There's zero value for that. But if you are a integrated utility and you are in your portfolio, and at nighttime the transmission lines are getting high voltage, and you've got that PV plant that you can use to absorb the reactive power, to suck in the reactive power and do voltage, which we actually demonstrated this capability. It's available. Wouldn't you want that? Well, there's a value to that. But today, the market conditions may not value it. But when they do it in the future, that's not the time to look for that capability, right? As well. I have another example that I often like to cite is when we built this 290 megawatt PV plant in Arizona. I went to the APS. This was in 2011. I said, "Hey, this PV plant can control voltage," and the transmission specialist there, really well, he's a good friend, by the way. And he said, "Hey, young man, you see on this 500 kV line, there is this nuclear power plant, 3.6 gigawatt plant, and you think you can control voltage on that line?" I said, "Yeah, but it can do its own part." But I said, no. What we want you to do is state constant power factor, unity power factor. In other words, don't disturb the line. Okay. 3 years later, this is a real story. 3 years later, that nuclear power plant, which has a line going from Arizona to California, went on service, that plant. And so the nuclear plant stayed on one side and the other side became basically usual. And the voltage started fluctuating like crazy. If I show you the graph, you look at it and say, oh my God, what's happening? They called up First Solar and say, hey, you guys were saying something about having voltage control. Can you turn that on? And I have published papers on showing that the operator had no idea how to turn the voltage control on, but we had built it in the controls. They looked around and turned it on, and sure enough, the voltage is controlled very well. The punchline is the voltage starts fluctuating again at nighttime. Why? Because nighttime PV plant is stay off. So I go back to them and say, hey, if you had given us incentive, we would have controlled the voltage at nighttime too. Because PV plant can do that. Yeah. So the point is, sometimes we have to help these folks to say, the capability that you want to put in now is, make sure that it is available to you for the next 30, 40 years of the plant life, because the grid is changing. And when it's changing, the market conditions will change, and you will have that potential, especially if the cost to do that is relatively small. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's my soapbox. How is that?
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed that.
Okay, thank you. So seems that there is no question online. So maybe you guys, anybody want to ask?
Yeah, thank you for the excellent presentation, Mahesh. I just had a quick question. So initially you showed how for the 290 megawatt PV plant, like cloud cover was not much of an issue. So my question is like, what kind of like geographical size are we talking about for the plant? And would you say that for typical transmission level like PV plants, would that also be the case, or maybe for smaller plants that they might be affected?
No, no, small plants will be impacted, no doubt about it. But what I was showing is that initially there was a lot of concern from power systems folks about, hey, what happens if the cloud covers in it? And it will suddenly drop in power. Well, it's also the case that power systems, the main thing is to balance load and generation, right? That's the main thing. What do you think? The load changes continuously. When I go into my office and turn off my light, I'm changing the load. Do you think that load is being monitored by anybody to make that happen? Because the aggregation of all that changes is what matters. So the point is that not only individual plants and its output changing matters, but actually aggregation of all that changes reduces the variation. That's exactly what we do by increasing the balancing area, is that more loads, more generators, we can balance them much easier. Does that make sense? So that's the idea. And this is just reverse, right? I mean, generation going down is just like load increasing. That's all. So, but as long as you have a large geographical area, I mean, if you look at, I was just showing examples of Texas. It's not the case that the clouds are not going onto the solar plants in individual solar plants, but the whole system is not seeing all the minor variation. Does that help?
Thank you. Yeah.
Other question? Yeah.
Yes.
Other question? Yeah, go ahead. Then after you.
Okay. So thank you for the great presentation, Dr. Mahesh. I think my senior already asked one question that I had, but another thing is, I think you are the right person to point this out. How much area do we require for per megawatt generation by solar in today's
So
state?
typically, we would say approximately 5 acres per megawatt, something like that.
5 acres per megawatt.
4 to 5, yeah.
And so another question following that is that in your slide, I think 16 or 17, you were showing that if we incorporate 4 hours of storage, then almost 98% of the, even through evening, we can provide for 98% of the load. And
yes.
Even though initial part of the presentation you said cost of storage is coming down, we are talking about 4 hours of storage for the whole plant. And you're saying the whole plant is like 250 megawatt and each storage is what, like $1 million per megawatt? I don't know how much it costs.
So and it's so the storage cost, I mean, I have figures which will show you, but basically if you look at storage cost, so storage cost was about $1,000 per kilowatt hour capacity.
Oh.
It's gone down to over, the last figure was about 120 or something like that per kilowatt hour of capacity.
Okay.
And it's expected to go to even below 100. 100 was the Department of Energy goal by 2030. And I think we are going to be past it. Now, why has that happened? Is principally because China has produced so much electric cars and batteries and all that. That's what the driver is. But nonetheless, that's the point. So, and I gave you example, right? I gave you a example from Allen plant where the cost increase of, so when I say $100 per kilowatt hour capacity, that has to be translated into what is the levelized cost of storage. Levelized cost of storage is every kilowatt hour I put into the storage, how much increase it adds to the costs. And that was of the order of $13 in that Allen plant. $13. In other words, if I or something like that, yeah. So if I generate electricity from solar at $15 and I add $13, I'm basically getting clean energy at $28 per megawatt hour. That's 2.8 cents per kilowatt hour. Just to reference, typical retail price in most places is 10 cents per kilowatt hour.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. I had one question regarding like the behind the meter solar installation, like residential or I don't know for the distribution systems, because you don't have any controllability over those, right? Like what you showed is basically big solar plants where you can use that for multiple services, but maybe in future you have much more solar installation in distribution system, and that is causing much more problem in the whole balancing or I don't know in different reliability metrics. So what do you think about those and in future, like how it's gonna?
So first of all, if you look at the installation in the US,
Yeah.
that's not the case. Residential is
Okay.
way smaller. But let me ask the second part of that is it causing issues? What issues do you think they're causing?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have, let's say, I don't know how it's going to be in the future, but maybe if it is much substantial solar installation from the distribution side, you just don't have controllability, right? So you will see all this fluctuation, and then you have problem with reliability. Yeah. So
okay, so let's look at Hawaii.
Yeah.
Because why? Because Hawaii, everybody is putting solar. Why they're putting solar? Because cost of electricity is so high, it is beneficial for them to put that.
Right.
So what did Hawaii do? Hawaii started, hey, wait a minute, in the middle of the day, I get so much electricity back from the residential units that the utility have no way of controlling it.
Right.
So they basically said, if you want to put new installation, export of solar back to the grid is zero. You have to make sure of that. So that then encouraged lots of people to put in storage. And so that once you have storage on that, then you are in good shape. So then the controllability is there as well, because now you have storage and you can control that. In fact, there's a company that I'm very what should I say? Very pleased about it. It's called Base Power in Texas. Okay. Base Power made a very interesting claim. They basically go to residents and say, listen, I'm going to put a storage in your backyard. Yeah, very low cost to you as a resident. And what I'm going to do is guarantee you a rate, your retail price. And so then they use the storage as a control storage so that they can basically do arbitrage with the grid, right, and do all the controllability, etc. Now think about it. The most interesting thing in my mind is that A, they don't have to worry about interconnection. B, they are basically the residents are happy because they get these fixed retail price. You know, Texas is a pretty arbitrary, pretty free market, so they can get a pretty fixed price. C, they get backup power whenever if something goes wrong. So it's a very win-win situation. So now what is Base Power doing is basically almost arbitraging the utility. Is that the utility of the future? Think about it this way. Now, what stops utilities from saying, hey, I'm an integrated utility, I'm in Georgia Power. I will go to all my residents and say, listen, I'm going to put storage there and I'll give you a better price and so forth. All that can change. So utility of the future could be very interesting from that perspective. And this is something that this buddy of mine at Georgia Tech, Deepak Diwan, they are working on all that distributed energy to do exactly things like that. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. So basically, it will also have to be controllable, right?
And that can be controllable. That's exactly what Base Power is doing, is that they make it controllable. but they have an incentive to make it controllable because they want to arbitrage the wholesale versus retail price and all that. Also wholesale market price. And then they can give services back to the grid also, right? This is what many of the people in DER are talking about. How do we make virtual power plant, etc. Here it is. They have already got ideas to make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, these concepts are there for a long time, and not yet in practice, right? Like people are still not installing batteries at house, and
that's exactly, yeah, you're exactly right. So concepts are very well known. I mean, we actually so know, but the companies like Base Power is implementing that concept. So I think that's what makes it, to me, that also makes it interesting.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, last question. If anybody has a question, last question. No, you're good. Good. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Mahesh. And I appreciate you stayed 20 minutes, even more than what we.
No problem. My pleasure.
We really appreciate that. One more time.
Thank you. Thank you for all your questions as well. This is, you should all be excited about this area and do more work in this. That's my goal. How's that?
Yeah, this was quite informative. Like, especially you showed all the reports and.
Yeah, even that's really nice that you also keep publishing the result. That is really, we really appreciate that. So because you see this thing in the industry, but in academia, we don't see that. But you are among the one that you really keep publishing the result. We appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. I'll send you my presentation so you can distribute it if you like as well.
That would be great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a great day. See you sometime soon. Thanks.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Bye.
Sure. Thank you. Bye.